All airline disasters involve probability, which is why it's important to envision them. And here, we imagine an accident that was overcomplicated by airplane and political authorities, when the cause was simple. One of the most memorable airline catastrophes of recent years, with conclusions that were written up, published, and voiced when it was too soon to speak. We have waited 8 years, and now, with all the information properly in hand, we can produce a definitive film, a final resolution to the uncertainty and speculation surrounding EgyptAir Flight 804. Information and technical data are presented here with more certainty than any that currently exist. To shine a bright light on the subject, we enter the plane's cockpit to make the story fact-filled, cross-checking dials and equipment to gain a true perspective of what happened at each moment, leading to the spiraling fall of a plane from the skies. EgyptAir Flight 804 was a regularly scheduled passenger flight from Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport to Cairo International, operated by EgyptAir. On May 19, 2016 at 0033 GMT, the Airbus A320 crashed into the Mediterranean Sea, killing all 56 passengers, 7 crew members, and interestingly, 3 security marshals. Like the US, EgyptAir employs a small security detail with each plane, with marshals usually sitting up front in business class. Unlike the United States, however, they are not undercover. No Mayday call was received by air traffic control before the aircraft disappeared from the radar. Indeed, no messages were received from the 3 marshals who were close to the cockpit. The last communications from the aircraft prior to its disappearance were 2 transmissions from the emergency transmitter, received by COSPAS SARSAT, the International Satellite-Aided Search and Rescue Program. The aircraft had been due to land at 01:15 GMT. It was originally reported that a distress signal from emergency devices had been detected by the Egyptian military at 04:26 GMT, 2 hours after the last radar contact, but officials later retracted the statement. It was a typical crumb of disinformation, one of many reported by the initial crash inquiry. Another was in December 2016, when Egyptian officials said that they had detected traces of explosives on the bodies, hinting at a possible terrorist attack. US officials also believed the aircraft was downed by a bomb, and a senior official said that their monitoring equipment at the time detected evidence of an explosion. They were wrong. It was all speculation. What was the truth? What can we know for certain about what happened in fact? General and technical information from events on a passenger plane come from 2 primary sources. Cockpit voice microphones are typically located between the pilot's seats to catch engine noise, instrument warning sounds, or other clicks and clues critical to investigators. There is a first pilot station audio, a second pilot station audio, as well as a microphone for passenger loudspeaker recordings on the overhead instrument panel between the 2 pilots. And significant here, recorded as separate audio tracks. The recorders in the A320 are installed in the most crash-survivable part of the aircraft, the tail section, and are equipped with an underwater locator beacon, ULB, in the event of an over-the-water accident. However, these must be recovered first to access their invaluable information. In the case of EgyptAir 804, the recorders were virtually impossible to locate given the wide, deep-sea crash site, initially leaving investigators without their primary resource. Even with the help of the US Navy, it remained elusive. This then leaves us with the ACARS interface, the interactive display unit in the cockpit, which flight crews can use to send and receive technical messages and reports to and from ground stations, such as a request for weather information, clearances, or for the status of connecting flights. ACARS now becomes the dominant, all-seeing eye in our investigation. Messaging has already been initiated by the aircrew, and ACARS is logging them all. The Airbus A320 takes off from de Gaulle at 21:09 GMT and is due to land in Cairo at 01:15 GMT. As it does so, information is immediately recorded on the Flight Data Recorder, or FDRs, and the Cockpit Voice Recorder, or CVRs. The flight continues without interruption until 23:24 GMT as the plane enters Greek airspace. At 23:48 GMT, Greek air traffic controllers speak to the pilot as the plane flies over the island of Kea. The controller's notes at this point reveal that the pilot was in good spirits. He had formerly reported no problems. However, only 38 minutes later at 00:26 GMT, the first critical signs appear. Data on the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, ACARS, registers smoke in the nose of the airliner in both the front lavatory and in the avionics bay beneath the cockpit floor. The nose cone section part of the airplane that you never get to see. At 00:28 GMT, after registering the ACARS warning, Greek controllers try to make contact with the plane before it leaves Greek airspace. Despite repeated calls, the aircraft does not respond. Within 1 minute, the aircraft will leave Greek airspace and vanish from the tracking radar. The million-dollar question here is, if there was an electrical fire in the aircraft's avionics compartment, why hadn't the aircrew communicated their distress to air traffic control? Might they have been distracted? In those critical last few minutes, erratic in-flight actions are also recorded. The aircraft changes its heading 90 degrees to the left, then turns a full 360 degrees to the right, spiraling as it does so, dropping from a flight level 370 to 15,000 feet, 4,600 meters. The plane still registers on Egyptian radar for another 2 minutes beyond Greek radar scanning, but at 00:30 GMT, disappears when 280 kilometers or 174 miles from the Egyptian coast. At 00:36, 6 minutes after the last ACARS message, 2 transmissions from the aircraft's emergency locator transmitter, ELT, are received by the Kospes Sarsat satellite. That final message marks the moment when the aircraft crashed into the sea. The flight had lasted 3 hours, 25 minutes. At 00:45 GMT, search and rescue operations are initiated. 7 messages in total had been sent and received between ACARS and the aircraft between 00:26 and 00:29, and contact was lost only a minute later at 00:30. The data of smoke detection was also confirmed by France's Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis, BEA. There was initial skepticism about this data because smoke detectors of the type installed on some A320s can also be triggered by other factors beyond an electrical fire. For example, with the fog produced by condensation and water vapor. They have also been triggered by a sudden loss of pressure inside the cabin. Let's return to the cockpit to investigate those last few minutes in detail. The A320's optical smoke detectors have been deemed more reliable than most, however, as they produce fewer false warnings. They are still sensitive to dust and aerosols. In this case, the data is sound. The real clue buried in the data was that the smoke event is located by the cockpit window on the co-pilot's side. Stick a pin in that. The Flight Control Unit, FCU, is a cockpit-fitted unit that the pilot uses to enter instructions into the 2 flight management guidance computers, FMGC. In addition to what was going on with the smoke, an FCU-2 fault indicated a connection loss between the Flight Control Unit, FCU, and the Flight Management Guidance Computer number 2. The guidance computer is one of the 3 computers that controls the spoilers and elevator actuators. Some investigators and other pilots immediately interpreted the data as evidence of a bomb. Also, the ACARS data showed that smoke and fault alarms registered at the same moment, and critically, that data recording stopped abruptly at an altitude of 9,800 feet, 3,000 meters above sea level. The implication of a bomb was gaining credence, particularly because the plane was flying in clear weather. With these transmissions, investigators were able to calculate the likely point of impact of the flight in the Mediterranean Sea. Over a month after the crash, with investigations ongoing, Egyptian officials announced on the 29th of June that data recovered from the flight recorders in the wreckage of the submerged plane indicated that the smoke that had occurred on the aircraft matched previous information relayed by the plane's automated systems, or ACARs. But they now also had the voice recordings, throwing the inquiry into a completely new direction. An analysis of just a single audio track of the cockpit voice recorder from the overhead console suggested that one of the pilots had tried to extinguish a fire in the cockpit before the airplane crashed. Strangely, and not identified at first, was the unusual hissing sound buried deep in the audio track. So that now, several years later, the smoke mystery can finally be revealed. A recent report from the investigation revealed that the fire was caused by a cigarette in the cockpit, which burned out of control when exposed to oxygen emitted from a mask that had been improperly set to an emergency setting. All at once, accounting for the mysterious hissing. Egyptian pilots habitually smoked in the cockpit, and the practice was not prohibited at the time of the crash in 2016, according to a recent 134-page report produced by aviation experts. For reasons that have not been determined, the setting on the oxygen mask had been switched by a maintenance engineer from normal to emergency, causing it to emit oxygen. The unidentified hissing sound was the oxygen escaping from the mask, a hissing that had been captured on the console recording at around 0025 GMT, a few minutes before the aircraft crashed into the sea. The pilots of the plane should have detected the faulty mask before taking off, because when pilots first enter the cabin for a scheduled flight, among the various checks they make before taking off is to test and reset the flow of oxygen in the masks. In the case of EgyptAir 804, this clearly did not happen. Never has there been greater uncertainty about an airplane crash than EgyptAir 804. So that until today, very few people have understood the true nature of the catastrophe. In retrospect, disasters are always predictable, and this video is an attempt to mitigate the next calamity. And the importance of not grabbing the nearest theory. The appalling irony is that the disaster did not reveal a bomb, but a single idiocy. It appears that the behavior of ordinary people can have graver consequences than we dare to imagine.